The woman dragged this pine log uphill alone. Matthew Harmon watched from his horse on the ridge. Late October wind cutting through his coat. The log was full length, heavy enough that two men would have cursed hauling it. She had rope over her shoulder, boots digging into rocky soil, her faded calico dress, mud stained to the knees. Wyoming territory stretched vast and unforgiving around them, autumn painting the landscape in burnt amber and faded gold. The distant Laramie Mountains loomed purple against the horizon, their peaks already dusted with early snow. Stands of lodgepole pine cast long shadows across the valley as the afternoon sun slanted toward evening. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, its cry lonely in the vast silence. At 42, Matthew had seen his share of determined folk in this harsh country. His Winchester 73 rested in its scabbard, the walnut stock worn smooth from years of use. The war had ended 15 years ago, but the memories still rode with him. Antietam, Gettysburg, the faces of men who never came home. His right knee, shattered by Confederate grape shot at Cold Harbor, ached with the coming weather. The leather eye patch covering his left eye, another war souvenir, had grown stiff with the dropping temperature. The railroad had cut through these parts 10 years prior, the Union Pacific bringing change at the speed of steam. 4 years since he buried Rebecca and the stillborn child she died delivering, their graves marked with simple stones on the hill behind his ranch house. But this woman, this slip of a woman with arms corded like wire rope, she had a quality that made him pause, a steel in her spine that spoke of someone who wouldn't quit when sensible folk would. Matthew adjusted his worn leather duster against the biting wind and nudged his bay gelding down the slope. The half-built cabin came into view. Walls barely chest-high, no roof, surrounded by scattered tools and cut timber. A canvas tent sagged beside it, smoke rising from a meager fire pit. She heard his approach and straightened, breathing hard. She didn't run, didn't call for help, just stood there, chin up, watching him come. "Afternoon," Matthew said, dismounting. His right knee popped, the old injury acting up with the coming cold. His eyes traced the cabin walls, reading the story they told. Too many gaps between the logs, corners not properly notched, a chimney foundation too narrow to draw properly. That's a lot of cabin for one person. Don't need charity from strangers. Her voice was steady, but her hand stayed on the rope like she might need to use it as a weapon. He noticed her knuckles, raw and scabbed, but determined. Matthew studied the walls. Roof won't hold without proper bracing. Storms coming in 2 weeks, maybe less. First big snow will collapse that. He pointed to the north wall, where the logs weren't properly supported. "I'll manage." The wind picked up, sending dead leaves skittering across the clearing. Matthew looked at her, then really looked. A scar ran from her left temple to her jawline, old and pale against weathered skin, the mark of someone who'd faced fire and survived. "Burns," he guessed. She read his gaze and her shoulders tightened. "I'm not pretty," she whispered, defensive, like she'd said it 100 times before. Matthew met her eyes. "That's fine. I need honest, not fancy. Winter kills pretty folk first out here." She blinked. Something shifted in her face. Surprise, maybe, or suspicion of kindness. They stood in silence, measuring each other while the wind moaned through the pines, carrying the scent of snow and the promise of a hard winter. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "Because I'm tired of liars and nice dresses." He picked up her hammer, tested its weight. The handle was wrapped in cloth strips for a smaller grip, her adaptation. "You got nails?" She hesitated, then nodded toward a crate. "I can pay with labor. I cook. I mend." "Fair enough." He walked to the nearest wall, examined the joints. The notching was amateur but showed careful attention. She'd been learning as she went. "What's your name?" "Eliza Winters." "Matthew Harmon. I run cattle 3 miles south. Double Pine Ranch." He glanced at the ski, clouds thickening, light fading. "We start tomorrow at first light." Eliza watched him ride away until he disappeared into the pines. Then she sat down hard on a stump, hands shaking. First snow in 2 weeks. First hope it's 6 months. She wasn't sure which scared her more. The Double Pine spread covered 800 acres of prime Wyoming grazing land, purchased parcel by parcel after Matthew returned from the war. The main house stood 2 stories tall, built from local pine and riverstone, with a wide porch facing the eastern sunrise. Beside it, a barn large enough to house 20 horses, though he kept only 8. 3 corrals, a smokehouse, and a bunkhouse completed the central buildings. A creek ran through the northern section, providing year-round water for his 200 head of Hereford cattle, a breed still relatively new to the territory, but thriving under his care. The brand, a simple double pine design, was respected across 3 counties as a mark of quality. Inside the main house, Juan Vasquez, the 65-year-old ranch hand who'd been with Matthew since the beginning, kept a pot of coffee perpetually brewing on the cast-iron stove. The old Mexican had followed Matthew north after the war, bringing with him knowledge of cattle and horses that had proven invaluable. Now he managed the day-to-day operations when Matthew was away, his leathered face and silver-streaked mustache as much a fixture of Double Pine as the brand itself. The town of Redemption Creek lay 7 miles east of Eliza's homestead, a collection of wooden buildings surrounding a church and general store. The town had grown since the Union Pacific had connected it to the world in '69. Now it boasted a 2-story hotel, a proper bank, and even a small doctor's office. Civilization creeping westward, mile by iron mile. Originally just a watering stop for stagecoaches, Redemption Creek had grown to nearly 500 souls since the railroad came through. The general store, operated by the widow Johnson, sold everything from seed to saddles. Mason's Saloon served whiskey to cowhands and travelers alike, while Chung's Laundry handled the town's washing. The First Presbyterian Church stood tallest, its white steeple visible for miles across the prairie. Maxwell Crawford stood at his office window in the Redemption Creek Bank and Land Company, watching Matthew Harmon ride through town. Crawford was 45, with manicured fingernails and a silver pocket watch chain that caught the late afternoon light. His 3-piece suit had been tailored in Denver, the fabric imported from England. Unlike most who came west, Crawford brought Eastern money and Eastern ambitions. Born to a banking family in Connecticut, he'd seen opportunity in the expanding railroad and moved west 10 years earlier. Through careful loans, strategic foreclosures, and partnerships with railroad interests, he now controlled nearly a third of the commercial property in Redemption Creek and thousands of acres surrounding it. His latest venture involved water rights for the planned Denver Spur Line, a project that would make the right investors very wealthy indeed. Beside him, Reverend Holloway fidgeted with his Bible. The 50-year-old minister had come west to civilize the frontier, but had found Crawford's friendship more profitable than salvation alone. The arrangement benefited both. Crawford gained moral authority by association, while Holloway's church received generous donations and prime land in town. "She's building on that North Ridge," Holloway said, the scarred woman. "Eliza Winters," Crawford said. His eyes narrowed. "The Harmon place is south. What business does he have up there?" "A Christian man shouldn't be alone with such a woman. There are rumors about how her husband died." Crawford turned from the window. On his desk lay a surveyor's map, with blue lines marking underground watercourses. One thick blue vein ran directly beneath Eliza's plot, a subterranean river that, properly tapped, could supply water to the planned railroad depot and surrounding development. The Denver and Rio Grande Railroad Company was prepared to pay handsomely for reliable water access. "The Denver rail spur will need water," Crawford said, "when it comes through next year." His fingers traced the route already marked in red pencil. 20,000 gallons daily for steam engines alone, not counting the planned town expansion. "Will she sell?" Crawford smiled thinly. "Everyone has a price, Reverend, or a breaking point. 3 previous homesteaders had occupied that land in the past 5 years. All had eventually sold to Crawford for a fraction of its worth. None had known about the water. The last, a stubborn German immigrant, had found his cattle mysteriously dying until he finally gave up. Crawford didn't care about the cabin or the rocks. He wanted what lay beneath. Matthew crouched by Eliza's fire the next afternoon, examining her tools while she boiled coffee in a dented pot. The hammer handle, the sorted nails, the careful stacks of lumber. Everything spoke of someone who planned, who thought ahead. A woman who'd survived by being prepared. "You do good work," he said, noting how she'd organized the nails by size in a wooden box with compartments. "Taught myself." She handed him a tin cup. "After my husband died." He sipped the coffee, strong and bitter, cowboy style. "Town's got a lot of widows." Why buy land out here alone? Most head back east to family. Eliza's jaw tightened. Merchant in town wanted me after Thomas passed. Said I needed a man's protection. When I refused, her knuckles whitened around her cup. She stared into the fire. Rumors started, cursed woman, witch who burned her own house down. Couldn't buy flour at the general store. Blacksmith wouldn't shoe my horse. Matthew said nothing, waiting. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks upward into the darkening sky. Fire started during a fight, she continued, voice flat. Thomas had been drinking at Mason's since noon. Came home after dark, already in a rage. Started yelling about supper being cold, about me being useless. Knocked the lamp over during the fight. She stared at the flames. Oil spread across the floor like water. I tried to pull him out. He hit me into the flames. I got free. He didn't. She touched her scar unconsciously. Town buried him a hero. Buried me alive with gossip. 6 months of hell before I saved enough to leave. So you bought this claim? With everything I had left. Figured if I'm going to be alone, might as well be on my own terms. She looked at him directly. What about you? Ranch that size? You should have a wife, sons even. Matthew set down his cup. Had a wife, Rebecca, beautiful woman. Everyone loved her. He paused, searching for words that didn't sound bitter. She came from money, Philadelphia family. Met her when I was selling horses back east. She wanted adventure, wanted to tame a war hero. His laugh held no humor. She wanted town life, parties, dances, people admiring her. Ranch bored her. He paused. She died 4 years back. Childbirth. Baby didn't make it either. Doctor was drunk. I was in Cheyenne buying breeding stock. The guilt still rode him, 4 years on. Got back to find both gone. I'm sorry. Don't be. I loved her, but I didn't like her much toward the end. She didn't like me either, truth be told. He stood, brushed off his pants. Town widows circle me now like buzzards. All performance, no help. I'm drowning in women who want to be Mrs. Harmon, but don't want to be my partner. Eliza stood too, studying him with new understanding. So this arrangement is practical. Matthew nodded. You need help before winter. I need meals and mending. Nobody needs to make it more complicated. Agreed. They shook hands. Her grip matched his, calloused, firm, honest. He noticed she didn't look away, her gray eyes direct and clear. In a world of pretense, her straightforwardness was as refreshing as spring water. We'll start on the roof frame tomorrow, he said as he rode off. Eliza watched until the trees swallowed him. Then she turned back to her half-built cabin, something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope was dangerous, but maybe this once it was worth the risk. Eliza Winters had grown up in Boston, the daughter of a school teacher. Her childhood had been one of books and learning, with expectations of a suitable marriage and a comfortable urban life. She'd met Thomas when he came east as a railroad surveyor, handsome, ambitious, full of stories about the expanding West. Their courtship had been brief, romantic, filled with promises of adventure and prosperity. The reality proved different. Thomas took her to St. Louis first, then Denver, finally Wyoming as the railroads pushed ever westward. Each move found them in rougher conditions, with Thomas drinking more heavily. The first time he struck her, he wept afterward, promised it would never happen again. The second time, he blamed her. By the 10th time, it had become routine. When she lost their baby in the 7th month, something broke in both of them. Thomas drank more, worked less. She withdrew into books, into memories of her Boston life. The physical abuse worsened. Twice she tried to leave. Twice he'd found her, dragged her back, made public shows of reconciliation while neighbors looked away. The night of the fire, she'd been reading by lamplight when he burst in, already raging about money spent on books while his dinner went cold. She remembered the lamp falling, the sudden whoosh of flame, his hand pushing her face toward the fire. The searing pain as her skin met flame. Her desperate roll away, the door so close yet so far. She'd escaped, turned to help him despite everything. But the roof beam had collapsed. The town found her outside, clothes smoldering, face burned, while Thomas remained inside. The story wrote itself. Crazy wife, tragic accident, heroic husband who'd tried to save her. No one questioned why her injuries were only on one side of her face, or why her arms bore fresh bruises in the shape of fingers. They worked for 3 days straight. Matthew showed Eliza how the roof needed to pitch at a precise angle, 45 degrees, steep enough to shed heavy snow, but not so steep the winter winds would catch it like a sail. Wyoming winters brought snow measured in feet, not inches, and a flat roof meant collapse by January. See how these rafters join? He demonstrated with 2 pieces of timber. You need a proper bird's mouth cut here, where they meet the wall plate. Distributes the weight down through the wall, not out. He showed her how to notch the wood so the joints locked together, stronger than any nail. He explained the importance of proper spacing, 24 inches between each rafter. No more, no less. Too wide and the roof would sag under snow weight. Too narrow and they'd waste valuable lumber. Every piece of wood had to be hand-sawn to precise length. Every joint tested for fit before nailing. The corners are the key, he explained, showing her how to reinforce each meeting point with additional bracing. Storm winds hit hardest at the edges. Lose a corner, lose the roof. For the outer covering, Matthew recommended split shakes rather than sawn boards. More labor to create, but better at shedding water and lasting through seasonal expansion and contraction. He showed Eliza how to use a froe and mallet to split cedar logs along the grain, creating natural shingles that would overlap for waterproofing. The gaps between logs needed sealing against winter drafts. The traditional mixture of mud, straw, and lime wouldn't hold in Wyoming's extreme temperature shifts. Instead, Matthew taught her to use a mixture of clay, horse manure, and pine needles, a combination that would flex with the weather while keeping heat in and cold out. Eliza learned quickly, asking questions that revealed her practical mind. This joint needs a third support, she said on the 4th day, pointing to where 2 beams met. Otherwise, it'll weaken by February. Matthew examined her suggestion, nodded with respect. You're right. Good eye. He showed her how to add a small diagonal brace that would prevent lateral movement when winter winds hammered the structure. The October days grew shorter, colder. The roof frame took shape. They fell into a rhythm. He would arrive at dawn, they would work until dusk, share a meal by the fire, then he would ride back to his ranch. Each evening, the conversation came easier. One weekend, Eliza measured a board while Matthew sawed, their breath fogging in the cold air. The cabin walls were complete now, the roof frame half finished. They worked in efficient silence, a rhythm developed through days of shared labor. Hold this steady, Matthew said, lifting a beam. She braced it while he hammered. Snow dusted their shoulders, melting against their necks. Thomas used to drink, Eliza said suddenly. Started after we lost our first baby. Got mean when he drank. Matthew kept hammering but listened. He'd heard rumors, of course. Town talk, but town talk was rarely truth. That night he came home drunk, started yelling about supper being cold, about me being useless. Knocked the lamp over during the fight. She stared at the beam she was holding. I tried to save him. Even after everything, I tried, but the fire, she shook her head. Town decided I must have wanted him dead. Easier to blame the scarred woman than admit their church deacon beat his wife. Matthew set down the hammer. My wife wanted everything I couldn't give her. Status, excitement. I knew she was unhappy, but I kept hoping the ranch would be enough. He looked at the mountains. When she died, my first thought was, I'm free. Been hating myself for that ever since. Maybe God gives us what we can't keep so we learn what we actually need, Eliza said quietly. Maybe. Matthew picked up his hammer again. Or maybe God's just quieter than preachers claim. The snow intensified suddenly, thick flakes, wind picking up. Matthew squinted at the sky. We need to stop. This is turning into a blizzard. You should go before it gets worse. Too late for that. He secured the tarp over the unfinished roof. I'm staying the night. Eliza's face went carefully blank. There's only one blanket. We'll manage. By nightfall, the storm howled outside. Wyoming blizzards were legendary, temperatures dropping to 30 below zero, winds gusting to 50 miles per hour, snow accumulating 6 inches an hour. Men had frozen to death walking from barn to house in such conditions. Cattle huddled in ravines, sometimes to be completely buried by drifting snow. Inside the half-finished cabin, they worked quickly to fortify against the cold. Matthew stuffed rags into the worst gaps between logs while Eliza built up the fire pit. The canvas tarp overhead snapped and bulged with each gust, threatening to tear free despite the extra ropes they'd added. The temperature inside dropped steadily as night fell, their breath visible in the firelight. They sat by the fire, canvas tarp overhead, sharing Eliza's blanket around their shoulders. Not touching, but close enough to feel each other's warmth. The single blanket was wool, heavy with the scent of wood smoke. Outside, the wind's howl became a physical presence, pressing against the walls like something alive and hungry. In the Sioux tradition, storms have spirits, Matthew said, feeding another log to the fire. Old Juan at my ranch says they're the voices of those who died alone on the prairie, searching for shelter. That's comforting, Eliza replied dryly. He says if you listen close, you can hear them warning travelers, trying to save others from their fate. They fell silent again, listening to the wind's mournful keen. In the heart of a Wyoming blizzard, such stories seemed less superstition than wisdom. Eliza pulled a book from her pack, water-stained but intact. Do you read? Barely, Matthew admitted. Never had much schooling. War came, then ranching. Never seemed time. I could teach you, if you want. I'd like that. She opened to a marked page and began reading aloud. Homer's Odyssey. Penelope waiting for Odysseus, faithful despite 20 years of separation. Her voice was soft but clear, turning ancient words into something alive. Stranger, wheezed Penelope answered, all my excellence, my beauty and figure, were ruined by the bonds when the Argives embarked for Ilium, and with them went my husband. If he were to come back and tend my life, greater and fairer would my fame be. As it is, I am in sorrow. Such troubles has some god brought upon me. Matthew listened like a man starving. Education had been sparse in his Tennessee upbringing, enough reading to sign his name and cipher basic sums. Literature was a world he'd glimpsed but never entered. Hearing Eliza give voice to Homer's ancient words opened something long dormant. She waited 20 years, he said when Eliza paused. How could anyone be that faithful? Perhaps she loved him. Perhaps she had no choice. The story doesn't quite say. Eliza turned the page. But when he returns, he must prove himself to her as much as she proved herself to him. That's the part people forget. She continued reading, the words flowing like water. Somewhere around midnight, exhausted, her head drooped against his shoulder. Matthew went very still, afraid to wake her, afraid to move. The storm raged outside, but inside this precarious shelter, something fragile had taken root. At dawn, she stirred and realized where she was. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. Neither pulled away. Then Matthew looked through the doorway. Just a frame, no door yet, and his face hardened. What? Eliza asked. Horse tracks in the snow. Fresh ones. He moved to the doorway. Someone circled the cabin during the storm. In the distance, riders approached. 3 men led by Reverend Holloway. Matthew moved beside Eliza, close enough that his presence made a statement. The town had come calling. Mrs. Winters, Holloway called out, reining his horse. Frost rhymed his beard, evidence of the brutal ride. We came to check your welfare in the storm. I'm fine, Reverend, Eliza replied. Holloway's eyes moved to Matthew, narrowed. Mr. Harmon, surprised to find you here. Storm caught me, been helping with the cabin. Yes, I can see that. Holloway's gaze traveled over the half-built structure, lingering on the single blanket visible through the doorway. The men behind him shifted. One was Crawford's foreman, Davis, a hard-faced man with reputation for handling problems. Another, the town blacksmith, Miller, who'd refused to shoe Eliza's horse. The third Eliza didn't recognize. Younger, nervous, with the look of someone following orders rather than convictions. Scripture tells us to avoid even the appearance of evil, Holloway said. A woman alone with a man, unchaperoned. People talk, Mrs. Winters, after your history. My history. Eliza's voice had gone flat. You mean surviving when my husband didn't? Holloway cleared his throat. Crawford's offering honest work at his boarding house, room and board. You could come back to town, live proper. Matthew felt Eliza stiffen beside him. He stepped forward. Reverend, Matthew 23, verse 27. Jesus called men like you whitewashed tombs, clean outside, full of dead men's bones within. His voice was quiet but carried in the cold air. She's building her home. Legal claim signed and witnessed. You tell Crawford if he wants to make offers, he can write up himself. Color flooded Holloway's face. The good book also teaches respect for church elders, Harmon. It teaches a lot of things, including not bearing false witness. Now we've got work to do. The men stared at each other. Finally, Holloway turned his horse. We'll be watching, Mrs. Winters, he said, for your own good. After they'd gone, Eliza released a breath she'd been holding. Why would they come all this way in the snow? Matthew was already examining the ground where the night rider had circled. This wasn't about you. Not entirely. He crouched, pointed to where melted snow revealed damp earth. You've got water, lots of it, underground spring. Water, it's everywhere. Not like this. See how the snow melts in this pattern? He traced a line with his finger. Underground river. Probably feeds all the way to Blackfoot Creek. See how the snow melts faster here? Water's close to surface, keeps ground warmer. He stood, pointing to the distant mountains. That watershed feeds this whole valley. Most places water runs deep, 50, 100 feet down. Here, maybe 15 feet at most. Man who controls water controls everything out here. With the Denver spur coming through next year, Crawford will need water for steam engines. Eliza looked bewildered. This is just rock and dirt. Matthew shook his head. This is a fortune, and Crawford knows it. So what do? First, we finish your roof, then we file official water rights at the land office in Cheyenne. Wyoming territory law says first claim gets priority. I've got a book on it back at the ranch. He stood, brushing snow from his knees. Crawford's not the only one who can read a map. The Wyoming Territorial Water Rights Act of 1870 established the doctrine of prior appropriation. First in time, first in right. Anyone who filed proper documentation with the Territorial Land Office established legal claim to water on or under their property. Such rights, once registered, superseded later claims, even from powerful interests like railroads or cattle barons. They worked harder after that, racing the weather and the threat from town. Eliza's cooking improved with fresh meat Matthew brought from his ranch. His clothes returned mended, reinforced at the knees and elbows. They developed an easy partnership, anticipating each other's needs. One night, Matthew pulled a creased paper from his coat pocket. Found this in my pocket. Might interest you. It was the bill of sale for Eliza's land, Crawford's signature at the bottom. She took it, frowning. This says $50. I paid him $75. And it's worth $500, easy. With the water rights, maybe $1,000. Matthew watched her face. He cheated you, Eliza. Told you it was worthless when he knew damn well it wasn't. Her hands tightened on the paper. He said I was getting charity prices because no one else would want this plot. He lied. Question is, what are we going to do about it? She looked up at him. We? I've seen what Crawford does to people who stand in his way. Had 3 small ranchers forced out last year. Suddenly couldn't get loans, couldn't sell cattle, couldn't buy seed. Man has reach. Matthew poured more coffee. Johnson lost his south pasture after the bank called in his loan early. Peterson's well got poisoned. Frederick's fences kept getting cut until his cattle scattered across 3 counties. Eliza stared into the fire. Why help me fight him? You've got your own ranch to worry about. Matthew was quiet a long moment. I watched Thomas yell at you once in the general store, 1.5 years ago, over something small. Wrong kind of flour, I think. Everyone saw it. No one said anything, including me. He met her eyes. Maybe I'm trying to balance accounts. The confession hung in the air between them. Eliza absorbed it, nodded slowly. Then we need a plan. The blizzard hit mid-December with 3 days' fury. Eliza and Matthew were trapped inside. Wind howling so loud they had to raise their voices to be heard. But the cabin held, every joint, every beam, every nail they'd driven together. It all held. The temperature outside dropped to 20 below zero. Inside, they maintained a small fire, careful with their limited wood supply. Snow drifted against the north wall, actually providing additional insulation. The roof, now properly finished, bore the weight of 2 feet of snow without creaking. Your work's good, Eliza said, watching the walls. Our work, Matthew corrected. They fell into domestic rhythm. She read aloud for hours from her small collection of books. Homer, Shakespeare, a worn Bible. He listened, mending tack, learning words by listening. Sometimes he'd stop her, ask for a word to be explained. She never made him feel ignorant, just explained with simple clarity. He taught her to braid rope properly, showing how different patterns created different strengths. His hands covered hers, demonstrating the movements. Their hands touched, and she didn't flinch. The second night, she woke screaming. Eliza! Matthew was across the room instantly, hands visible, non-threatening. You're safe, you're here, the fire's banked. She was shaking, sweat-soaked despite the cold. I dreamed I was burning again. Thomas was holding me down. He's gone, he can't hurt you. But I'm still afraid. Her voice broke. I hate that I'm still afraid. To be touched, to trust anyone close to me. Matthew sat on the floor beside her bedroll, careful to keep distance. When Rebecca died, my first thought was relief. That makes me a coward, doesn't it? It makes you human. She wiped her eyes. I haven't touched another person beyond handshakes in 2 years. Scared of what it might mean. Scared I'd mess it up again. They sat in silence, two damaged people learning they weren't alone. The third night, exhausted from tension, Eliza fell asleep against his shoulder while he read haltingly from her book. He was learning, slowly. He didn't move until dawn, afraid to break whatever fragile thing was growing between them. She woke, realized where she was, met his eyes. I'm sorry, she started. Don't be. You smell like pine smoke, she murmured, half asleep, still. And safety. You feel like home, he whispered back. Morning broke clear and bright. The storm had passed. They separated awkwardly, both knowing they had crossed a line neither could name. Matthew stepped outside to check the chimney and froze. Fresh horse tracks circled the cabin in the snow. Someone had watched them during the storm, close enough to see through the windows. Their privacy had always been an illusion. The week before Christmas, Eliza insisted on accompanying Matthew to town for supplies. I'm tired of hiding, she said, pinning her hair beneath a bonnet that partially obscured her scar. If they want to talk, let them talk to my face. Redemption Creek was 7 miles east of Eliza's homestead, a collection of wooden buildings around a church and general store. They arrived Sunday morning, just as services let out. Eliza walked beside Matthew down Main Street, chin up, scar visible in cold sunlight. Conversation stopped. Women clutched children away. Men stared with contempt or unwanted interest. The town had changed little in the months since Eliza left. The hotel still needed paint. The livery stable still leaned slightly. New construction at the edge of town marked the future railroad depot, Crawford's latest investment. A Christmas tree stood in front of the church, decorated with paper stars and candles, a symbol of civilization in the wilderness. Reverend Holloway blocked the mercantile steps, flanked by Crawford and 3 church elders. Crawford wore a new fur coat, the collar turned up against the cold. His eyes, calculating and cold, fixed on Eliza like a predator's. Brother Harmon, the preacher's voice carried, this woman is known for sin. You defile her and yourself with this arrangement. People gathered, forming a crowd. Children stared openly at Eliza's scar. One woman crossed herself. Another whispered behind her hand to her companion, who nodded vigorously. Crawford stepped forward, oily smile in place. Eliza, my offer stands. Honest work at my boarding house. Save both your reputations. End this. He gestured vaguely. Wilderness experiment before the real winter arrives. Holloway nodded. The town forgives, Mrs. Winters, but you must repent. Matthew felt panic rise. The old instinct to avoid scandal, to protect his name. Rebecca had cared so much about appearance. He'd spent years enabling that lie, becoming someone he didn't recognize to please a woman who was never satisfied. The faces around them were people he'd known for years, people he traded with, worshipped with, people whose good opinion had once mattered. Crawford watched him with the confidence of a man who knew exactly how social pressure worked in small towns. It's just work, he heard himself say. The cabin's nearly done. The words hung in frozen air. Eliza went rigid beside him. Just work. He'd reduced it everything, the shared nights, the laughter, the trust they'd built, to labor. Made her nothing again. See, Crawford's smile widened. Even he knows you're not worth defending, Eliza. She turned and walked to the wagon without a word. The silent ride home lasted forever. At her cabin, she climbed down, spoke without looking at him. Don't come back. The cabin's finished. Our contract's done. She closed the door heat hung in his face. Matthew sat in the wagon, snow beginning to fall again, and understood exactly what he'd done. He'd chosen reputation over truth, just like before, and this time he'd destroyed something real. Christmas week arrived, cold and clear. Matthew sat alone in his ranch house, whiskey bottle on the table, staring through frost-glazed windows at his wife's grave on the hill. The house was warm, well-built, empty as a church. The rooms Rebecca had decorated remained unchanged 4 years after her death. Chintz curtains, imported carpets, furniture too fancy for a ranch house. All the trappings of civilization she'd insisted on, none of which had made her happy. On Monday, he'd done it again. Chosen appearance over honesty, cowardice over courage. Eliza had offered him truth. Rough, scarred, real truth. And he'd called it just work. To save face in front of people whose opinions meant nothing. The bottle sat untouched. Drinking wouldn't fix this. 3 miles away, Eliza worked alone in lamplight, finishing the final details. Barn door, garden fence, small repairs. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind was numb. She should have known better than to hope. Men always disappointed, even good ones, especially good ones, because their betrayals hurt worse. Christmas morning, she woke to find something on her doorstep. Wild flowers, frozen in ice like preserved memories. No note, just flowers. She carried them inside and wept. That afternoon, old Samuel Reed rode up to Matthew's ranch. Samuel was 70, weathered as saddle leather, the man who'd taught Matthew everything about ranching. Samuel had been the one to suggest Wyoming after the war, when Matthew was still healing from his wounds, had fronted half the money for the first parcel of land, had shown him how to build, brand, breed cattle, more father than Matthew's own had ever been. Samuel had survived 30 Wyoming winters, 2 Indian wars, and the loss of his own wife 20 years earlier. His wisdom came hard-earned, his advice rarely wasted. You look like hell, Samuel said, not dismounting. Feel worse. Good. That woman built more with broken hands than most men manage with whole ones. Samuel's voice was harsh. Your wife wanted pretty. This one wants real. You going to let fear win twice? What if she won't forgive me? Then you earned it, but you still got to try or die alone in that coal bed you're making. Samuel had never remarried after losing his Sarah, had lived 40 years alone because he couldn't find another woman who measured up. His life had been successful by most measures, land, cattle, respect, but the emptiness of his cabin spoke volumes. Samuel rode off, leaving Matthew standing in his empty yard. He looked at Rebecca's grave on the hill. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Sorry I couldn't be what you needed. Sorry I couldn't love you the way you wanted. He took a breath. But I'm done apologizing for wanting something real. He saddled his horse and rode to town. Sunday morning, Matthew Harmon stood before the packed church, hat in his hands. I'm here to confess, he said, and to set some things right about Eliza Winters. The First Presbyterian Church of Redemption Creek had never been so silent. As Matthew Harmon stood before the congregation, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart, he could feel Crawford's cold stare burning into him from the front pew. Behind him, the wooden doors remained firmly shut, snow gathering on the steps outside, as if nature itself was holding its breath. I'm here to speak truth about Eliza Winters, he continued, gripping his hat tighter, and about myself. The churchgoers shifted uncomfortably in their pews. Crawford sat in the front row, face expressionless but eyes calculating. Reverend Holloway stood at the pulpit, Bible open, sermon interrupted. Mrs. Winters didn't kill her husband, Matthew said. Thomas Winters was a drunk and a wife-beater. I saw it myself once, in broad daylight at Johnson's store. He struck her over a sack of flour. Everyone saw. No one spoke. Murmurs rippled through the congregation. Crawford's jaw tightened. The night of the fire, Thomas came home drunk and knocked over a lamp during one of his rages. When the flame spread, He pushed Eliza's face into the fire. That's how she got her scar. She escaped, tried to save him despite everything, but couldn't reach him when the beam collapsed. Matthew looked at the faces watching him, some hostile, some curious, some ashamed. You all knew, or suspected, but Thomas sang in the choir, donated to the church, so you buried him a hero and her a murderer. Mr. Harmon, Holloway interjected, this is hardly the place. It's exactly the place, Reverend. Isn't church where we confess our sins? Well, I'm confessing mine. I knew the truth and said nothing. I watched a good woman driven from town by lies, and I did nothing. Matthew turned to face the congregation directly. But that's not why Crawford wants her gone. He wants her land. There's a major underground spring running beneath it. Water that will be worth a fortune when the Denver spur comes through. Crawford stood abruptly. These are wild accusations. I have the original bill of sale, Matthew continued, pulling papers from his coat. Shows Mrs. Winters paid $75 for land Crawford recorded as $50, and I have surveyor's maps showing the watercourse. Copies went to the Territorial Land Office in Cheyenne yesterday. The church erupted in whispers. Crawford's face darkened as Matthew laid the papers on the altar. But my real sin was 2 days ago, standing right there on Main Street. When Mrs. Winters needed someone to stand by her, I faltered. Called our partnership Just Work to save face with you people. His voice cracked slightly. In doing so, I betrayed a woman who's shown more courage, more honesty, more worth than anyone I've met since the war. The silence was profound now. Even the children sat motionless. You all think that scar makes her ugly, but there's a kind of beauty that goes deeper than skin. The kind that shows in how a person faces adversity, in how they build something from nothing. Matthew put his hat back on. I'd rather stand with one honest, scarred woman than a church full of pretty liars. He walked down the aisle, boots echoing on the wooden floor. At the door, he stopped and turned. Service is over for me, but Crawford's Denver water scheme affects every one of you. Might want to ask him about it before putting another dollar in the collection plate. Outside, Matthew mounted his horse and rode toward Eliza's cabin. Behind him, the church doors burst open as congregants spilled into the street, their raised voices carrying on the winter air. The snow had stopped by the time Matthew reached Eliza's homestead. Smoke rose from the chimney, evidence of life within. He dismounted slowly, his knees stiff with cold, and stood before the door he'd hung himself weeks ago. His stomach knotted as he raised his hand to knock. The door opened before his knuckles touched wood. Eliza stood framed in the doorway, eyes wary. You've got nerve coming back here, she said. Matthew removed his hat. I've been called worse things than nervy. What do you want? To apologize, properly. He met her gaze directly. What I said in town, it was cowardice, plain and simple. She studied him, arms folded. Apology noted. Anything else? I went to church this morning. Seeking absolution? Seeking justice. Told them the truth about Thomas, about Crawford's water scheme, about my own failings. He paused. About you. Eliza's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. And how was that received? About as well as you'd expect. Crawford looked ready to call for a hanging. Left quite a commotion behind me. She stepped back from the door. Not an invitation exactly, but not a dismissal either. You've made enemies, she said. Powerful ones. Wouldn't be the first time. Coffee's hot, she said finally. Might as well come in before you freeze. The cabin's interior felt different now, more finished, more lived in. A proper table and chair stood in one corner. Shelves lined one wall, holding her few books and supplies. The fire burned steadily in the stone hearth they'd built together. His eyes caught on small improvements everywhere. Hooks for clothing, a rag rug on the floor, a window box awaiting spring planting. In the short time since he'd left, she'd been transforming the shelter into a home. She poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handed him one without meeting his eyes. They sat at opposite sides of the small table. I've filed your water rights in Cheyenne, Matthew said. Made it official. Crawford can't touch it now, not legally anyway. Thank you, she said, the words stiff but sincere. I also had a word with Judge Haywood. He's willing to reopen the inquest into Thomas's death if you want to clear your name officially. Eliza's hands tightened around her cup. What would that involve? Testimony, evidence. Matthew hesitated. It would mean facing the town again, answering questions. But you'd have me standing with you this time, for whatever that's worth. She looked out the window at the snow-covered landscape. I've stopped caring what Redemption Creek thinks of me. Fair enough. He sipped his coffee. But legal exoneration might make a difference someday. Your choice. They sat in silence, the fire crackling in the hearth. Outside, a raven called, its harsh voice carrying through the winter stillness. Why did you really come back, Matthew? She asked finally. Guilt? Pity? Matthew set down his cup. Because in all my life, I've only met a few truly honest people. Samuel Reed is one. You are another. He met her eyes across the table. And because when I'm here, in this cabin we built, I feel more myself than I have in years. Eliza looked away. Pretty words. Not pretty, true, there's a difference. She stood abruptly, moved to the shelves, adjusted items that needed no adjusting. What exactly are you proposing? A second chance? To be your friend, your partner in making this place work. Nothing more, nothing less, unless... He left the sentence unfinished. Unless? Unless someday you want more. Matthew stood but kept his distance. I'm not Thomas. I won't make promises I can't keep. But I can offer honesty, hard work, and respect. And if the town turns against you for associating with the murdering witch, let them. I've lived through worse than gossip. Eliza turned to face him fully. The scar on her face caught the firelight, a pale line against her skin. Her eyes, gray as winter skies, studied him with a depth that felt like judgment. I need time, she said finally. Matthew nodded. I understand, I'll go. No, the word came quickly. I meant, I need time to think while you're here. Sit. Finish your coffee. He sat back down, relief washing through him. Outside, the winter day was fading toward dusk, shadows lengthening across the snow. Tell me about your confession, she said. I want to hear every word. Maxwell Crawford paced his office like a caged wolf. His normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, collar unbuttoned, hair mussed from running his fingers through it repeatedly. On his desk lay the morning's disaster. Matthew Harmon's copies of the water survey and land sale records. He's outmaneuvered us, Reverend, Crawford snarled. Filed the water rights before we could stop him. Holloway sat heavily in the leather chair across the desk. The congregation is in turmoil. Half believe Harmon's story about Thomas Winters. The other half don't know what to think. I don't give a damn what they think. Crawford slammed his fist on the desk. Without that water access, the Denver Spur becomes 10 times more expensive to operate. The railroad might pull out entirely. Perhaps we should consider an alternative route. There is no alternative route. The terrain won't allow it. We need that spring. Crawford lowered his voice with visible effort. What about Davis and the others? Where do they stand? Davis will do whatever you pay him to do. Miller's worried about his reputation if the Thomas Winters story spreads. The others are waiting to see which way the wind blows. Crawford poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon, drank it in one swallow. We need to act quickly, before this gets any worse. What exactly are you suggesting? Accidents happen in Wyoming winters, Reverend, particularly to isolated homesteads. Crawford's eyes were cold. A fire, rustlers. Any number of misfortunes could befall the widow Winters and her champion. Holloway blanched. Maxwell, surely you're not suggesting... I'm suggesting we protect our investments. The future of this town. Crawford poured another drink. The railroad brings prosperity for everyone. 2 people standing in the way of progress is a problem that requires solving. This is crossing a line. We crossed that line years ago. Crawford's smile was without humor. Or have you forgotten the German farmer? Or Peterson's well? Your church was built with that money, Holloway. Too late for scruples now. The minister stared at his folded hands. What do you need from me? Keep the town calm, discredit Harmon's claims, remind people of Eliza Winters' questionable character. Crawford straightened his tie, composure returning. I'll handle the rest. Crawford stared out the window, eyes fixed on something beyond the visible. You know I wasn't born to this, Reverend. My father worked himself to death in a Connecticut factory while the owners lived in mansions. I swore I'd never be powerless like him. He turned, a rare glimpse of vulnerability crossing his features. This town, this railroad, they're not just business. They're proof that I matter, that I exist. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by cold calculation. I won't let some scarred woman and one-eyed rancher take that from me. Not when I've come this far. Holloway studied the man he'd hitched his wagon 2 years ago, seeing for the first time the wounded boy beneath the banker's polished exterior. It didn't excuse Crawford's methods, but it explained the desperation behind them. After Holloway left, Crawford opened his safe, removed a small ledger. Inside were names, dates, amounts paid for services rendered. He sent a messenger to fetch Davis. Some problems required direct solutions. Matthew stayed for dinner, a simple stew of dried beef and root vegetables. They spoke of practical matters, the need for more firewood, plans for a small barn come spring, how the roof had held during the blizzard. Beneath the ordinary conversation lay a current of tension, of things unsaid but felt. Neither mentioned his near confession before he left, or the way she had whispered safety when half asleep in his arms. As darkness fell, Matthew reluctantly stood to leave. I should get back to the ranch. Juan will be wondering where I am. Eliza walked him to the door. When will I see you again? The question held no demand, just a simple desire to know. Tomorrow, if that suits you. I need to check my cattle after the storm, but I could come by afternoon. She nodded. I'd like that. At the threshold, Matthew hesitated. Eliza, about Crawford. He won't take today's events lightly. He's a dangerous man when crossed. I'm no stranger to dangerous men. All the same, keep your doors locked. And this. He drew a Remington revolver from his coat, offered it grip first. Do you know how to use it? She took the weapon, checked the cylinder with practiced ease. Thomas taught me before the drinking got bad. I'm a fair shot. Keep it close. He put on his hat. I'll see you tomorrow. Outside, his horse nickered softly in greeting. The night was clear and cold, stars hard as diamonds in the black skirmium. Matthew mounted up, looked back at Eliza standing in the doorway, lamplight haloing her figure. Be careful, she called. Always am. The ride back to Double Pine took him past the outer edges of Redemption Creek. Lamplight glowed in windows, smoke rose from chimneys. Normal scenes of town life, yet Matthew felt watchful eyes tracking his passage. At the saloon, a group of men fell silent as he rode past. One spat in the snow. Word traveled fast in small towns. By now, everyone would know of his church confession. Lines would be drawn, sides chosen. He had made himself a target to stand by Eliza. He didn't regret it, but he wasn't fool enough to ignore the danger. Juan was waiting when Matthew reached the ranch, a lantern held high to guide him in. The old Mexican's face was creased with concern. You have made enemies today, Patron, Juan said in his accented English as Matthew dismounted. Word comes even here. Not the first time, Juan. Crawford is not like other men. He uses others to do his dirty work. Matthew handed over the reins. How are the cattle? Safe in the south pasture. Storm passed them by. Juan led the horse toward the stable. I have loaded all the rifles, just in case. Inside the house, Matthew found a fire burning and coffee hot on the stove. Juan's silent support. He checked the doors and windows, placed his rifle within easy reach of the bed. As he prepared for sleep, he realized he felt more alive than he had in years. The possibility of danger, the clarity of purpose, these were familiar companions from his war days. More than that was the knowledge that tomorrow he would see Eliza again. He slept deeply, dreamlessly. When he woke, weak winter sunlight streamed through his window. No attackers had come in the night, no retribution yet delivered. Perhaps Crawford was biding his time, or perhaps Matthew had overestimated the man's reach. After breakfast, he rode out to check the cattle. The herd had weathered the storm well, clustered in protected ravines. Winter was always hard on livestock, but his Herefords were hardy stock, bred for Wyoming's harsh conditions. As he counted heads, confirming none had been lost, Matthew noticed fresh tracks in the snow. 3 riders, cutting across his south pasture, heading toward Eliza's homestead. A chill ran through him that had nothing to do with the winter cold. He spurred his horse northward, pushing the animal hard. The tracks continued, clear in the fresh snow. Men from town, most likely. Crawford's men, almost certainly. Matthew's heart hammered against his ribs as he topped the final ridge overlooking Eliza's cabin. In the clearing below, 3 mounted men were dismounting. He recognized Davis, Crawford's foreman, leading the group. One carried what looked like a coal oil can. Matthew drew his Winchester from its saddle scabbard. At this distance, maybe 400 yards, he couldn't be certain of a shot, but he could get their attention. He aimed high and squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report cracked across the winter landscape. Below, the men froze, then scrambled for cover. Matthew worked the lever, chambered another round, fired again. He urged his horse forward, down the slope. The animal picked its way carefully through the snow. Matthew kept the rifle ready, eyes locked on the scene below. The cabin door opened. Eliza appeared, his Remington steady in her hands. She fired a warning shot over the intruders' heads, then took cover behind the door frame. Caught in a crossfire, the men made a quick decision. They remounted, abandoning whatever plan they'd had, and galloped eastward, back toward town. Matthew continued his approach, rifle still at the ready, until he was certain they wouldn't circle back. When he reached the cabin, Eliza stepped out, the revolver still in her hand. Her face was pale but composed. "You have good timing," she said. "Saw their tracks crossing my pasture." He dismounted, wincing as his bad knee took his weight. "Did they say what they wanted?" Davis claimed they were bringing a welcoming gift from town. She nodded toward the abandoned coal oil can. "Some welcome." Matthew picked up the container, sniffed it. "Coal oil, enough to burn the cabin down with you in it. Crawford's response to your church confession, I imagine. This goes beyond business. This is attempted murder." Eliza's eyes were hard. "What do we do?" "We can't prove it was Crawford's order. Davis would deny it, say they were just bringing supplies." Matthew looked eastward, where the riders had disappeared. "But they know now that you're armed and I'm watching. That might make them think twice about trying again. Or make them more determined." Eliza holstered the Remington in the pocket of her apron. "Either way, I'm not running." Matthew smiled despite the situation. "Didn't think you would." They went inside, where Eliza poured coffee, becoming their ritual, he realized. The cabin felt different in daylight, smaller but more intimate. On the table lay open books and paper, a pencil. "Were you writing?" he asked. She nodded. "Keeping a journal. I've done it since I was a girl. Helps make sense of things." "Makes sense. Words seem to matter to you." "They're reliable, unlike people." There was no bitterness in her voice, just statement of fact. Matthew warmed his hands on the coffee cup. "So what now? Crawford won't stop with one failed attempt. We could go to the marshal in Cheyenne, report the incident. We'd need proof, and even with proof, Crawford has friends in the territorial government." Eliza considered. "What about the railroad company? If they knew Crawford was using underhanded tactics to secure water rights, they might reconsider working with them." "That's actually a good idea. The Denver and Rio Grande doesn't want scandal. They're already fighting the Union Pacific for territory." Matthew set down his cup. "I know a man in their land office. Former cavalry, served with me at Antietam. Honest as far as railroad men go." "Can you reach him?" "Telegraph from town. Though showing my face there might not be wise right now." Eliza smiled thinly. "Then perhaps it's time the town saw my face again." They rode into Redemption Creek together that afternoon. Matthew had argued against it, but Eliza was adamant. "I won't hide forever," she said, "and 2 targets are harder to hit than one alone." The town was quieter than usual for a Monday afternoon. Faces watched from windows as they rode down Main Street. At the general store, the widow Johnson stared openly, then quickly closed her door. The saloon fell silent as they passed. "Welcoming committee," Eliza murmured. They continued to the telegraph office at the far end of town. The operator, a thin man named Phillips, visibly paled when they entered. "Mr. Phillips," Matthew said cordially, "I need to send a wire to Denver." I'm not sure I can, Mr. Harmon." Phillips glanced nervously toward the door. "Mr. Crawford was very specific. Mr. Crawford doesn't own the Western Union Telegraph Company. Last I checked." Matthew placed coins on the counter. "This is official business regarding railroad contracts. Interference would be a federal matter." The mention of federal authority made Phillips reconsider. "Very well, but be quick about it." Matthew wrote out his message to Captain James Thornton, Land acquisitions, Denver and Rio Grande Railroad Company. Brief, coded in places only another veteran would understand, but clear in its warning about Crawford's methods. As Phillips began tapping out the message, the door opened. Crawford himself stood there, impeccably dressed as always, flanked by Davis and another man Matthew didn't recognize. "Well," Crawford said, smile not reaching his eyes, "the hero returns, and with his damsel in distress, no less." Matthew positioned himself between Crawford and Eliza. "Our business isn't with you, Crawford. But mine is very much with you, Harmon." Crawford stepped inside, removing his gloves finger by finger. "You've made quite a stir in my town, spreading lies, undermining legitimate business interests. The only lies here were told long before I spoke up." Crawford's eyes flicked to Phillips, still tapping out the telegram. "Stop that message." Phillips froze, fingers hovering over the key. "Sir, It's already sent," Matthew lied smoothly, "to the Denver and Rio Grande offices, regarding your methods of acquiring water rights." Crawford's face hardened. "You're interfering in matters you don't understand, Harmon. This town needs that railroad spur. Jobs, growth, future. The town needs honest leadership more." Matthew kept his voice level. "Your water scheme would benefit you, not Redemption Creek. As if you care about this town. You live apart, come in only when you need supplies. Now you presume to judge those of us building something here?" Eliza stepped forward. "He cares enough to speak truth when others won't." Crawford's gaze raked over her with undisguised contempt. "The murdering witch speaks. How touching." Matthew's hand dropped to his pistol, but Eliza's touch on his arm stopped him. "I didn't murder my husband, Mr. Crawford. But I no longer care if you or anyone in this town believes that." Her voice carried in the small office. "What I do care about is truth. And the truth is, you tried to have me killed this morning." Crawford's laugh was genuine. "My dear woman, if I wanted you dead, you would be. Davis merely brought coal oil as a gesture of goodwill for your lamps." "With 3 armed men? In the middle of winter?" Matthew shook his head. "Save your lies for people who believe them." Crawford's amusement faded. "You've made a serious mistake, both of you. This isn't over." "On that much, we agree." Matthew nodded to Phillips. "Finish the telegram, Mr. Phillips. We'll wait." Crawford stared at them for a long moment, then abruptly turned and left, Davis trailing behind him like a faithful hound. Through the window, Matthew watched them cross the street to the bank building. Phillips completed the telegram with shaking hands. "It's sent, Mr. Harmon, but I can't guarantee it will reach Denver. Crawford has friends all along the line. Then we'll have to find another way to get the message through." Matthew tipped his hat. "Thank you for your service, Mr. Phillips. Remember which side of this you chose today." Outside, they mounted their horses. The street was eerily empty, townsfolk having retreated indoors at the sight of Crawford's confrontation. "That man is more dangerous than Thomas ever was," Eliza said quietly. "Thomas was a drunk with a temper. Crawford is calculating." Matthew nodded grimly. "We should get back to your place before dark. I don't trust him not to try something else." As they rode out of town, Matthew felt eyes on them, not just from windows and doorways, but from rooftops and alleys. Crawford was watching their every move. The afternoon was waning, winter daylight already fading toward dusk. They rode at a steady pace, alert for any sign of pursuit. A mile outside town, Matthew held up his hand, stopping them. "Listen," he said softly. In the distance came the sound of approaching riders, several of them coming fast from the east. "Get off the road," Matthew ordered, guiding his horse into the trees. Eliza followed without question. They concealed themselves in a stand of pines as 6 riders galloped past on the main road. Davis led them, rifle across his saddle. The men rode hard toward town, clearly returning from some errand. "Where were they coming from?" Eliza whispered once they'd passed. A sick feeling settled in Matthew's stomach. "My ranch. Double Pine is east of here." Her eyes widened in understanding. "Juan, we need to hurry." They kept to the trees, paralleling the road but staying out of sight. Matthew pushed their pace as much as safety allowed. His mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Juan was capable, experienced, but one old man against 6 armed riders. Smoke rose in the distance as they approached Double Pine. Not the normal smoke of chimneys and cooking fires, but thick black plumes that spoke of destruction. Matthew spurred his horse forward, caution forgotten. The scene that greeted them was one of devastation. The barn was ablaze, flames leaping high into the winter sky. The bunkhouse was already a smoldering ruin. The main house still stood, but fire had caught on one side, working its way toward the roof. "Juan!" Matthew shouted, dismounting and running toward the house. "Juan!" There was no answer. The heat from the barn fire was intense, driving them back. Eliza grabbed Matthew's arm. "The well," she said, pointing. "Get buckets. We might save the house." For the next hour, they fought the fire together, hauling water, throwing it on the flames, working in desperate silence. The winter air filled with steam and smoke. Their hands cracked and bled from cold and work. Gradually, they managed to douse the flames on the house, though nothing could be done for the barn or bunkhouse. As the immediate danger passed, Matthew renewed his search for Juan. He found the old Mexican behind the house, unconscious, a bloody gash on his head. He was alive, but barely. "Help me get him inside," Matthew called to Eliza. Together, they carried Juan into the house. The interior was largely undamaged, though smoke hung heavy in the air. They laid him on a couch where Eliza examined his wound with gentle hands. "Blunt force, someone hit him from behind." She cleaned the wound carefully. "He needs a doctor." "Nearest one's in town, Crawford's territory." Matthew paced, rage building inside him. "This is my fault. I should have been here." "It's Crawford's fault," Eliza corrected firmly, "and we'll make him pay for it. But first we need to take care of Juan." Matthew knelt beside the couch, took the old man's weathered hand in his. Juan had been with him since the beginning, had helped build everything that was now damaged or destroyed. More than a ranch hand. Family. "I'll ride for the doctor," Matthew said. "You stay with him." "And if Crawford's men come back?" "They won't. Not tonight. They've made their point." He stroked Juan's forehead gently. "Besides, you're a good shot, and there are more guns in the cabinet by the kitchen." Eliza nodded. "Be careful in town." "I'm done being careful." Matthew checked his pistol. "Crawford just declared war." Juan stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Patron," he whispered. "I'm here, old friend. Lie still." 6 men. I try to stop them." Juan's voice was weak. "They have cans of oil. Start with barn." "Did you recognize any of them?" "Davis and the blacksmith, Miller." Juan's eyes closed again. "I shoot one, in the leg, before they hit me." Matthew squeezed Juan's hand. "You did well. Rest now. I'm going for the doctor." Outside, Matthew surveyed the damage in the fading light. Beyond the destroyed buildings, he could see his cattle still safe in the distance. At least Crawford's men hadn't slaughtered the herd. Small mercy. Eliza joined him. "This isn't just about water rights anymore, is it?" "No, it's personal now." Matthew's voice was cold. "Crawford thinks he can break me. Drive me out like the others who stood against him. Will he succeed?" Matthew turned to her. In the glow of the smoldering ruins, her face was half lit, the scarred side in shadow, beautiful in her strength and determination. "No," he said simply, "because now I have something to fight for." As he rode toward town, Matthew's mind was clear, focused in a way he hadn't experienced since the war. Crawford had miscalculated. He'd thought to intimidate, to scare Matthew away from Eliza and her water rights. Instead, he'd awakened the soldier who'd survived Antietam and Cold Harbor, who'd learned that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Behind him, Double Pine smoldered, a monument to Crawford's cruelty. Ahead lay Redemption Creek, a town in need of redemption indeed. And beyond that, a future uncertain, but suddenly rich with possibility. For the first time in years, Matthew Harmon rode toward battle with purpose in his heart. Stars sprawled across the Wyoming sky like diamonds scattered on black velvet, cold and indifferent to the human drama below. Redemption Creek slept beneath this celestial canopy, most windows dark except for the golden rectangles of light spilling from the saloon. Piano music drifted through the night, punctuated by occasional laughter, the sound of men with no knowledge of how their world was about to change. Matthew moved like a shadow through the back alleys, the taste of ash and vengeance bitter on his tongue. Every step toward Dr. Franklin's house was a step deeper into a war he'd spent years avoiding. The doctor answered on the third knock, hair rumpled, suspenders hanging loose over his nightshirt. Edgar Franklin was 60, with kind eyes and steady hands despite his fondness for whiskey. "Matthew Harmon," he said, surprise evident. "Heard you caused quite a stir this morning. Need your help, Doc. Juan's been hurt. Bad head wound." Franklin's professional demeanor immediately surfaced. "Let me get my bag." As the doctor gathered his supplies, Matthew watched the street through the window. No sign of Crawford's men, but the night had eyes. "You're taking a risk coming to town," Franklin said, packing bandages into his medical bag. "No choice. Juan needs help." "This have anything to do with the smoke east of town today?" The doctor gave him a shrewd look. "Crawford's men burned my barn and bunkhouse. Would have gotten the main house too if we hadn't stopped them." Franklin nodded grimly. "Crawford's gone too far this time. Been happening more and more lately. Peterson last year, the German farmer before that." "You knew about those?" "Doctors see things, Matthew. Broken bones, burns, wounds that don't match the stories told about them." He snapped his bag closed. "You're Juan, he at the ranch?" "Yes, Mrs. Winters is with him." Franklin raised an eyebrow. "The widow? So rumors about you two are true?" "Only the honorable ones." Matthew's tone ended further questions. They left town quietly, taking Franklin's buggy rather than riding double on Matthew's horse. The night was bitterly cold, their breath plumbing in the still air. Stars stretched from horizon to horizon, indifferent to human struggles below. "Town's divided after your speech," Franklin said as they traveled. "Some folks are asking questions about Crawford they should have asked years ago. Others think you've lost your mind, siding with the witch. And where do you stand, Doc?" "I treated Eliza Winters after the fire. Saw the bruises under her burns. Old ones, not from that night. Knuckle marks on her ribs. I knew Thomas was beating her." Franklin's voice was heavy with old regret. "Should have said something at the inquest. Didn't. Town needed Crawford's money, his connections with the railroad. Seemed easier to let one woman carry the blame." They rode in silence for a time, the rhythmic clop of hooves marking their passage. "You doing this out of guilt or something else?" Franklin asked suddenly. Matthew considered before answering. "Started as guilt, seeing things right. Now it's more. She's a good woman. Deserves better than she's had." "I know. And Crawford's a rabid wolf, won't stop till he's put down or gets what he wants." "I know that too." As they approached Double Pine, the damage was starkly visible in the moonlight. Blackened timbers of the barn jutted like broken bones against the night sky. The acrid scent of burned wood hung heavy in the air. Inside the house, they found Eliza keeping vigil beside Juan, bathing his forehead with a damp cloth. The old Mexican was conscious but weak, his breathing shallow. Franklin examined him thoroughly, probing the head wound with gentle fingers. "Skull's not fractured, thank God. Concussion, though. Bad one. He needs rest, quiet." "Will he recover?" Matthew asked. "Good chance. He's tough, this one." Franklin cleaned the wound, applied a fresh bandage. "Keep him warm, hydrated. Watch for fever. If his pupils dilate differently or he can't remember simple things, send for me immediately." Juan managed a weak smile. "Not dying today, Patron." "Glad to hear it, old friend." Matthew squeezed his shoulder gently. Eliza had coffee ready when Franklin finished. They sat at the kitchen table, voices low. "What's your plan now?" the doctor asked. "Crawford won't stop, and with your barn gone, winter will be hard on your stock. I sent a telegram to the Denver and Rio Grande. Crawford won't be able to stop it. Phillips has a spine, surprisingly, but it'll take time for any response." Matthew stared into his coffee. "In the meantime, we protect what's ours, both here and at Eliza's place. You'll need help. Crawford has at least 6 men willing to do his dirty work. I've got Juan when he's better. Samuel Reed would come if I asked. And now you." Franklin looked startled. "I'm a doctor, not a gunfighter." "You're taking a side just by being here." Matthew's eyes were kind but unwavering. "Town will know by morning. Crawford will know. You're choosing justice over convenience, Doc. Little late, but welcome to the fight." The doctor absorbed this, then nodded slowly. "Been living with my choices too long anyway. Might as well make some new ones." He drained his coffee. "I'll come by tomorrow to check on Juan, and I'll spread the word to those who might listen." As Franklin prepared to leave, Eliza walked him to the door. Thank you, Doctor. No, Mrs. Winters. Thank you for your forgiveness. He looked at her directly. I should have spoken the truth about your husband's violence. We all should have. The past is done. What matters is what we do now. After Franklin departed, Eliza and Matthew checked on Juan once more, then found themselves alone in the kitchen. The house creaked around them, settling in the cold night. Outside, the wind had picked up, moaning around the eaves. You should take my room, Matthew said. I'll stay on the sofa near Juan. I'm not taking your bed while you sleep on a sofa in your own house. Proper thing to do. Eliza's eyebrow arched. Do you really think propriety matters now? After everything else today? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Probably not. Then let's be practical instead. You need rest. I need rest. There are 3 bedrooms in this house. We can each take one and leave the third for Juan when he's strong enough to move. Matthew nodded. Practical, indeed. A moment of awkward silence fell between them. Through the window, moonlight illuminated the burned skeleton of the barn, a stark reminder of their precarious situation. What are we going to do, Matthew? Eliza asked softly. About everything? He understood she meant more than just Crawford, more than the ranch or her homestead. There was the growing thing between them, undefined but undeniable. We're going to survive winter, he said simply. We're going to rebuild what Crawford destroyed. We're going to see justice done one way or another. He met her eyes. And the rest? We'll figure out as we go. No rush, no pressure. She studied him in the dim light. You're not like other men I've known. Given your experience with Thomas, I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. She moved toward the hallway. Good night, Matthew. Good night, Eliza. He watched her go, the straight line of her back, the determined set of her shoulders. A woman who had endured fire and emerged stronger. He thought of what lay ahead, Crawford's vengeance, Winter's trials, uncertain allies. For the first time in years, such challenges felt like opportunities rather than burdens. The next morning dawned clear and bitterly cold. Matthew woke early, checked on Juan, then built fires in the kitchen stove and the main hearth. The house had belonged to Rebecca, decorated to her tastes, floral patterns, delicate furniture, reminders of a marriage that had been more performance than partnership. He'd changed nothing after her death, lacking the energy or motivation. Now with Eliza's presence, the pretense seemed suddenly obvious, even ridiculous. He found her already awake, standing at the window watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and rose. She wore the same clothes as yesterday. She'd brought nothing with her in their rush from her cabin. I need to go back to my place, she said without turning. Get some things if I'm staying here. I'll take you after breakfast. My chickens need feeding, and I should check that Crawford's men haven't paid a visit there as well. We'll go together, after we eat and look in on Juan. His tone made it clear this wasn't negotiable. They cooked together, moving around the kitchen with an easy rhythm that felt both new and familiar. Juan managed to eat a little porridge, his eyes clearer than the night before. The old Mexican watched them with knowing eyes, but kept his observations to himself. After ensuring Juan was comfortable, they rode to Eliza's cabin. The morning was still, the cold intense, their breath and the horses forming clouds in the frozen air. Matthew kept his rifle across his saddle, eyes constantly scanning the terrain. The cabin stood undisturbed, smoke still rising faintly from the banked fire Eliza had left. Inside, the space felt smaller after the relative luxury of double pine, but Matthew found himself appreciating its honest simplicity. As Eliza gathered clothing and personal items, Matthew fed her chickens, checked the small shed where she stored firewood. Everything seemed intact, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Let's not linger, he said when she emerged with a small bundle. Back at the ranch, they found Franklin had returned, bringing news from town. Crawford had called a meeting at the saloon the night before, trying to rally support against Harmon's interference in progress. Some had been convinced, but others questioned Crawford's methods after hearing about the fire at Double Pine. Town's splitting, Franklin said. Holloway preached this morning about supporting established leadership, but half the congregation walked out. Any sign Crawford's planning something else? Matthew asked. Nothing specific, but Davis and Miller were meeting with some hard cases at the saloon. Men I don't recognize. Hired guns, maybe. How many? 3 that I saw, mean-looking, professional. Matthew nodded grimly. They'll come. Question is when and how many. What will you do? Franklin looked between them. Prepare and find more allies. Matthew turned to Eliza. Do you still want to clear your name officially with Judge Haywood? She hesitated only briefly. Yes. If Crawford's going to paint me as a murderer to discredit us, I want the truth on record. Then we ride to Cheyenne tomorrow. Judge Haywood will hear your testimony, make it official, and I can check on that telegram to the Denver and Rio Grande. Franklin nodded approval. I'll look after Juan while you're gone. When the doctor had left, Matthew and Eliza spent the afternoon making preparations. They cleaned weapons, packed supplies, discussed routes and contingencies. Working together, thinking together, they functioned as a seamless unit, each anticipating the other's needs. For Matthew, it was a revelation. Partnership as it should be, based on mutual respect rather than obligation. As evening approached, Samuel Reed arrived, rifle in hand, bedroll tied behind his saddle. The old rancher assessed the burned buildings with a practiced eye. Crawford's signature, he said, dismounting stiffly. He did the same to Peterson last year. Glad you came, Samuel. Matthew clasped his mentor's hand. Said I would have needed. Samuel nodded to Eliza. Mrs. Winters, heard a lot about you. Mr. Reed, she returned his nod with equal dignity. Thank you for coming. Fight worth having is worth having help for. The old man peered at the house. Juan inside? Yes, Doc Franklin says he'll recover. Good, mean old cuss is too stubborn to die anyway. They shared a simple dinner, the 4 of them forming an unlikely family around Matthew's table. Juan was well enough to sit up, though his movements were still slow. Samuel and Eliza took to each other immediately, both recognizing the same quality of straightforward honesty in the other. After the meal, they discussed plans for the coming days. Samuel would stay at Double Pine with Juan, while Matthew and Eliza traveled to Cheyenne. Crawford might send men here while you're gone, Samuel said. Juan and I can handle a few, but not an army. I've asked Doc Franklin to spread word among those who might help. Some of the smaller ranchers Crawford squeezed over the years. They might come. Might not. Samuel's face was pragmatic. People are cautious when it comes to crossing powerful men. We'll be back as soon as possible, Matthew promised. 2 days at most. Later, as Samuel and Juan played chess by the fire, Matthew found Eliza on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the cold. The night was clear, starred brilliant in the black vault of sky. Nervous about tomorrow? He asked, joining her. About seeing the judge? No. About leaving the ranch vulnerable? Yes. Samuel's tougher than he looks, and smarter than most. I can see that. She pulled the blanket tighter. He's important to you. Taught me everything worth knowing. About ranching, about being a man. Matthew leaned against the porch rail. My own father was difficult. Believed in fists more than words. Samuel showed me another way. Eliza absorbed this. Is that why you noticed Thomas's violence from experience? Maybe. Recognize the signs, I suppose. The fear in your eyes, the way you flinched at sudden movements. He looked at her directly. Why did you stay with him so long? Same reason many women do. Nowhere to go, no money. And hope that things would change. She sighed. He wasn't always violent. When we first married, he was charming, attentive. The drinking came later. Then the rage. They stood in companionable silence, 2 survivors sharing the night. Whatever happens in Cheyenne, Matthew said finally, whatever comes after with Crawford, I'm glad we met, Eliza Winters. Her smile was small but genuine. Even with all the trouble I've brought you. Even so, she reached out, touched his hand briefly. I'm glad too. The morning brought heavy clouds and the threat of snow. They departed early, traveling light but well armed. Matthew left his best horse for Samuel, taking his second mount. Still a strong animal, but one he wouldn't mind pushing if necessary. The journey to Cheyenne would take most of the day, the territorial capital being some 40 miles south. They rode steadily, speaking little, each lost in their own thoughts. Matthew kept them off the main roads, taking less traveled paths through the hills. Crawford had eyes everywhere, and their journey to see the judge would not be welcome news. By mid-afternoon, snow began to fall, soft flakes that gradually thickened. The temperature dropped as they followed the Laramie River Valley south. "Should we make camp?" Eliza asked as daylight began to fade. "No, better to push through. Town's only about 10 miles now." Matthew studied the darkening sky. "Storm's coming, though. Big one." They rode harder, racing the weather. The snow intensified, driven by strengthening wind. Visibility shrank to a few yards ahead, the world beyond lost in swirling white. Matthew kept them moving by instinct and experience, following the river's course when all other landmarks disappeared. Cheyenne's lights finally appeared through the storm like distant stars, a welcome sight after hours of blind travel. The territorial capital was larger than Redemption Creek, with proper streets and substantial buildings. Gas lamps glowed at major intersections, their halos diffused by falling snow. They found a modest hotel on the outskirts, stable hands taking their exhausted horses. Inside was blessed warmth, a lobby with actual carpet, the smell of cooking food from an adjacent dining room. "We need 2 rooms," Matthew told the clerk, "and information on where to find Judge Haywood in the morning." The clerk, a thin man with a waxed mustache, looked them over with practiced neutrality. "Judge's courthouse is 3 blocks west, opens at 9. Rooms are $1 each, meals extra." Matthew paid while Eliza warmed herself by the lobby fireplace. The storm rattled the windows, Wyoming winter asserting its dominance outside. "Dining room closes in an hour," the clerk added. "Kitchen serving stew and bread tonight." The stew was surprisingly good, thick with vegetables and beef. They ate hungrily after the long ride, the dining room nearly empty at this late hour. A few commercial travelers occupied other tables, paying them little attention. "What exactly will happen tomorrow?" Eliza asked, breaking a long silence. "Haywood will take your testimony under oath. He'll review the evidence from the original inquest. If he's satisfied, he'll issue a ruling clearing you of any wrongdoing in Thomas's death. And if he's not satisfied?" Matthew met her eyes. "He will be. Truth has weight, Eliza. Sometimes it takes time to be heard, but it can't be buried forever." She nodded, wanting to believe him. "And after, what then?" "We check on my telegram to the Denver and Rio Grande, then head back to Double Pine." He lowered his voice. "Sooner or later, Crawford will make another move. When he does, we need to be ready." "You make it sound like war." "It is in a way. Crawford's fought it for years, acquiring land, power, influence. Most folks didn't realize they were in a battle until they'd already lost." His face hardened. "But this time, he's facing people who know what's at stake." After dinner, Matthew walked Eliza to her room. The hallway was narrow, their shoulders nearly touching. "Try to rest," he said at her door. "Tomorrow will be difficult." Reliving it all, yes. She looked suddenly vulnerable. The strength that had sustained her momentarily dimmed. Acting on instinct, Matthew reached out, took her hand gently. "You won't be alone this time. Remember that." She squeezed his fingers, released them. "Good night, Matthew." "Good night." In his own room, Matthew sat by the window for a long time, watching snow transform Cheyenne into an anonymous landscape of white. His thoughts wandered, to Samuel and Juan back at the ranch, to Crawford plotting in Redemption Creek, to Eliza in the room next door, so close yet still separated by walls both physical and emotional. He remembered her as he'd first seen her, dragging that pine log uphill alone, refusing to quit despite the impossible task. That same determination had brought her through fire, through loss, through the judgment of an entire town. Whatever her scars, visible and hidden, they had forged rather than broken her. Matthew finally slept, lulled by the storm's rhythm against the glass. Morning came with continued snow, lighter now, but steady. They ate breakfast in the hotel dining room, neither speaking much. Eliza wore her best dress, still plain but neat, her hair arranged simply, her scarred face uncovered. She would face judgment as herself, without pretense. The courthouse stood in the center of town, an imposing structure of red brick with white columns flanking the entrance. Inside, marble floors echoed their footsteps as they inquired after Judge Haywood. The judge received them in his chambers, a room lined with law books and smelling of tobacco and leather. Gerald Haywood was 65, white-haired but vigorous, with piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. He'd been a territorial judge for 20 years, known for his fairness and impartiality. "Mrs. Winters," he said, rising as they entered. "Mr. Harmon." Please sit. He listened without interruption as Matthew explained the situation. Thomas Winter's death, the hasty inquest, Crawford's involvement in the recent events at Redemption Creek. Serious allegations, Haywood said when Matthew finished, particularly against a man of Crawford's standing. Which is why we need the truth officially established, Matthew replied. Crawford's using Eliza's reputation to discredit us both. The judge turned to Eliza. You understand, Mrs. Winters, that I'll need to question you under oath about your husband's death. Every detail. It won't be pleasant. I understand, Your Honor. I'm ready. For the next hour, Haywood did exactly as promised. His questions were direct, probing, sometimes painfully specific. Eliza answered each one with quiet dignity, describing Thomas's escalating violence, the night of the fire, her desperate attempt to save him despite his abuse. Matthew sat silently, witnessing her courage, wishing he could shoulder some of her burden. When she described how Thomas had pushed her face into the flames, her hand unconsciously rose to her scar. The judge's expression never changed, but his eyes softened almost imperceptibly. Thank you, Mrs. Winters, Haywood said when she had finished. Your testimony is compelling, consistent with physical evidence from the original inquest, though viewed through a different lens. He made some notes on the papers before him. I believe I have enough to render a finding. And what would that be, Your Honor? Matthew asked. That Thomas Winters' death was accidental, resulting from his own intoxicated actions. That Eliza Winters made reasonable attempts to rescue him from the fire he himself caused, and that she bears no criminal responsibility for his death. Haywood looked at Eliza directly. I'll have this finding officially recorded and copies sent to Redemption Creek's town records. Thank you, Your Honor, Eliza said quietly. Don't thank me, Mrs. Winters. Justice delayed is justice denied. You deserved this ruling years ago. Haywood's tone was regretful. As for your allegations against Crawford, that's another matter. I can't take official action based solely on your testimony, compelling though it is. We understand, Matthew said. But when you receive communications from the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad regarding Crawford's methods, I hope you'll give them proper consideration. I always consider evidence from all sources, Mr. Harmon. The judge rose, indicating their meeting was concluded. Be careful on your journey home. Crawford has friends in Cheyenne as well as Redemption Creek. Outside the courthouse, Eliza took a deep breath, as if a weight had lifted from her shoulders. Snow continued to fall, dusting her hair with white. Are you all right? Matthew asked. Yes. She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. For the first time in years, I feel free. Judge Haywood's ruling won't change everyone's minds. I don't need everyone, just those who matter. She looked at him. What now? The telegraph office. Then home. The telegraph office was busy, travelers and businessmen sending messages delayed by the storm. The operator, a young man with wire-rimmed spectacles, checked his logs when Matthew inquired about replies to his message to the Denver and Rio Grande. Yes, sir. Reply came in last night. He handed Matthew a yellow slip of paper. The message was brief but significant. Harmon stop allegations received. Stop investigation underway. Stop representative arriving Redemption Creek within week stop. Maintain documentation stop. Thornton end. Matthew showed Eliza, explained the significance. Thornton's sending someone to assess Crawford's methods. It's a start. Will it be enough? Depends on what else Crawford does before they arrive, but it gives us leverage. He folded the telegram, tucked it into his coat. We should head back. I don't like leaving Samuel and Juan alone too long. As they left the telegraph office, neither noticed the man watching from across the street, a thin figure in a black coat who had followed them from the courthouse. Nor did they see him enter the telegraph office after their departure, sending his own message to Maxwell Crawford. The journey back to Double Pine was harder than their trip to Cheyenne. The storm had left nearly a foot of fresh snow, obscuring trails and landmarks. They traveled slowly, Matthew breaking trail, Eliza following in his horse's tracks. By mid-afternoon, when they should have been halfway home, the sky darkened again. Not snow this time, but heavy clouds that brought early twilight. We need shelter, Matthew said, studying the threatening sky. There's an old line shack about a mile east, used by cowboys during roundup season. The shack proved to be little more than 4 walls and a roof, dusty and neglected but sound enough to provide protection. A small stone fireplace stood at one end, firewood stacked nearby, cowboy hospitality for the next traveler. Matthew built a fire while Eliza checked their provisions. They had enough food for a cold meal and coffee if they melted snow. The horses were secured in the rudimentary lean-to attached to the shack, blanketed against the dropping temperature. As darkness fell, the wind rose, moaning around the eaves. Inside, the fire provided modest warmth and light, shadows dancing across rough log walls. "Samuel will be worried," Eliza said, warming her hands by the flames. "He'll understand. Wyoming weather makes its own rules." Matthew arranged their bedrolls near the fire. "We'll start at first light tomorrow." They ate jerky and hardtack, drank hot coffee from a single tin cup passed between them. The storm intensified outside, wind finding every crack and seam in the shack's construction. "Will it always be like this?" Eliza asked suddenly. "The weather?" "No, the fighting, Crawford, danger." She looked at him across the fire. "Is this what life with you means?" Matthew considered her question carefully. "Crawford's not the first man I've crossed. Probably won't be the last. I have strong opinions about right and wrong." He poked at the fire. "But no, it won't always be like this. This particular fight will end, one way or another." "And then?" "Then we rebuild. The barn, the bunkhouse, your garden." He met her eyes. "A life worth having." "We," she noted. "You said we." "I did." The implication hung between them, neither pushing for more definition. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing. Inside, the fire popped and whispered, the only other sound in their temporary sanctuary. Eliza moved to her bedroll, suddenly weary from the day's travel and emotional toll. "We should rest." "Yes," but sleep proved elusive for both of them. The storm's fury increased, shaking the small structure. Cold seeped through the walls despite the fire. After an hour of restless discomfort, Eliza spoke. "This is foolish. We're both freezing." "I'm fine," Matthew lied, his voice betraying a slight tremor. "No, you're not. Neither am I." She sat up. "We should combine resources. Body heat. It's simple survival." Matthew hesitated, then nodded. They rearranged the bedrolls, creating one larger pallet near the fire. With awkward formality, they lay side by side, sharing blankets, careful not to touch beyond what necessity required. Gradually, warmth built between them. The shared space became comfortable rather than tense. Matthew lay still, acutely aware of Eliza's presence inches away, the rhythm of her breathing, the faint scent of her hair. "Matthew," she said softly. "Yes?" "Thank you for believing me, for helping me, for everything." He turned his head to look at her, found her already watching him. "No thanks needed." "Yes, they are." She moved slightly closer. "You gave me back something I thought was gone forever." "What's that?" "Trust in another person, in myself." Their eyes held in the firelight. A log settled in the hearth, sending sparks upward. Outside, the wind's voice rose and fell like distant music. Matthew's hand found hers under the blankets, their fingers interlaced, a simple contact that felt monumental. Neither spoke again, no words adequate for the moment. Eventually, Eliza's eyes closed, her breathing deepening in sleep. Matthew watched her face in repose, the scar a silver line in the dim light. Beautiful, though not in ways the world usually recognized. Beautiful in her courage, her resilience, her unflinching honesty. He slept finally, their hands still joined, while the storm raged impotently against their shelter. Dawn brought clarity, in the weather, in their hearts. The storm had passed, leaving a transformed landscape of pristine white. They prepared to depart in companionable silence, the awkwardness of the previous night replaced by a new ease between them. As Matthew saddled the horses, Eliza stood watching the sunrise paint gold across the snow. He paused in his work, struck by the image she presented, strong, serene, framed by nature's beauty. "What?" she asked, catching his gaze. "Just thinking." "About?" "How someone can walk through fire and emerge stronger." He secured a saddle strap. "Not everyone does." She smiled, a flash of genuine warmth that reached her eyes. "You did, after the war. After Rebecca, you survived. Surviving isn't the same as living. I was just existing until he left the sentence unfinished. Until, she prompted, until I saw a woman dragging a log uphill alone. They rode out as the day brightened, heading north toward Double Pine. The snow made travel slow, but the visibility was perfect, allowing them to see for miles across the rolling Wyoming landscape. By mid-morning, they topped the final ridge overlooking the ranch. Matthew reined in sharply, arm extending to stop Eliza as well. "What is it?" she asked. Below, in the yard of Double Pine, multiple horses were hitched to the rail. 7 riders had arrived during their absence, too many for casual visitors. Matthew drew his field glasses from his saddlebag, studied the scene. "Crawford's men," he said grimly. "Davis is there. Miller, the others I don't recognize." "Samuel and Juan?" He adjusted the glasses. "Can't see them. They might be inside." Or, he didn't complete the grim alternative. "What do we do?" Matthew considered their options. None of them good. "We can't leave Samuel and Juan if they're still alive. But riding straight in would be suicide. There must be another approach, a back way." "There is, through the south pasture. But they'll have men watching." He lowered the glasses. "I need to get closer, see what we're dealing with." Eliza corrected. "We need to get closer." He started to object, then saw the determination in her face. Arguing would waste time they didn't have. "Stay close. Do exactly as I say. If I tell you to run, you run, no questions." They backtracked down the ridge, circling wide to approach the ranch from the south. The fresh snow made silent movement impossible, but they used the cover of trees and rolling terrain to mask their approach. 100 yards from the main house, Matthew signaled a halt. They dismounted, secured their horses to a pine tree. He handed Eliza his spare revolver, checked his Winchester's action. "Stay here," he whispered. "I'm going to work closer. Try to see inside the house. Be careful." He moved forward alone, keeping to cover, Winchester ready. The burned shell of the barn provided concealment as he approached the main house. Voices carried on the still air, men laughing, a bottle being passed around. Crawford's men were celebrating something. From his position, Matthew could see into the kitchen window. The room appeared empty. He inched closer, trying to get an angle on the main room. A twig snapped behind him. Matthew spun, rifle rising, to find Davis standing 10 feet away, revolver already drawn and aimed. "Well, well," Crawford's foreman said with a cold smile. "Look who finally came home." Time slowed. Matthew's finger tensed on the trigger, mind calculating the odds. Even if he shot Davis, the gunfire would bring the others. 6 men against 1. No chance. "Don't bother," Davis said, reading his thoughts. "Drop it." The sound of a hammer cocking came from behind Davis. "You drop yours first." Eliza stood 20 feet away, Matthew's spare revolver rock steady in her hands. The scar on her face caught the winter light, silver against her determined expression. Davis hesitated, caught between threats. That moment of indecision was all Matthew needed. He lunged forward, Winchester swinging like a club, catching Davis across the temple. The foreman crumpled, without a sound. "I told you to stay back," Matthew whispered as they dragged Davis's unconscious form behind a woodpile. "And I told you we'd do this together." Eliza checked the fallen man's pulse. "He's alive. What now?" "We need to know if Samuel and Juan are alive." Matthew peered toward the house. "Cover me." They advanced together, using the burned barn skeleton for cover. From their new position, they could see through the front window. Samuel and Juan sat tied to chairs in the main room, surrounded by Crawford's men. Samuel's face was bloodied, but he was conscious, glaring defiance at his captors. Juan appeared unharmed, though slumped with exhaustion. "There's too many," Eliza whispered. A new sound cut through the afternoon. Hoofbeats. Many horses, approaching fast from the west. Matthew raised his field glasses, then smiled grimly. "Doc Franklin," he said, "and he's not alone." A dozen riders appeared over the ridge, Franklin in the lead, followed by Peterson, Johnson, and other small ranchers Crawford had squeezed over the years. Behind them rode a man in a neat suit, a Denver and Rio Grande Railroad badge gleaming on his chest. Justice, it seemed, had arrived ahead of schedule. Crawford's hired guns spilled from the house at the commotion, hands dropping to weapons. They froze at the sight of the armed riders. Matthew stood, Winchester raised. "It's over, Crawford." The banker appeared in the doorway, face twisted with rage. "This is my town, Harmon, my future." "Not anymore." The railroad man dismounted, producing official papers. "Maxwell Crawford, the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad is severing all contracts with you pending investigation of fraud, intimidation, and attempted murder." For a man who had built his empire on calculated risks, Crawford made a fatal miscalculation. His hand flashed to his coat, drawing a derringer. Before he could aim, 3 shots rang out simultaneously. Matthew's Winchester, Eliza's revolver, and Samuel's hidden pocket pistol, somehow kept concealed despite his captivity. Crawford fell without firing, his small gun skittering across the porch boards. His hired men, seeing the odds, dropped their weapons. Later, as Franklin tended to Samuel's cuts and the railroad man took statements, Matthew found Eliza standing by the remains of the barn, staring at the snowy landscape. "It's over," he said quietly, joining her. "Is it?" "Crawford's dead. His men will be tried. The railroad's bringing in a new agent to handle water rights. Fair ones this time." He touched her arm gently. "Judge Haywood's ruling clearing your name arrived by telegraph this morning. Samuel made sure everyone in town saw it." She nodded, processing it all. "What happens now?" "We rebuild. I was thinking we might start with a barn raising. Folks have offered to help." "Folks?" Her eyebrow arched skeptically. "You'd be surprised how many people were just waiting for someone to stand against Crawford." He took her hand, her fingers cold in his. "And after that, well, your cabin's still standing. My ranch needs work. Both are good places." Eliza turned to him, her gray eyes searching his face. "Are you asking me something, Matthew Harmon?" "I'm saying we have choices now. Real ones." He smiled, the lines around his eye crinkling. "And I'm saying I'd like to face whatever comes next together. If you want." She studied him for a long moment. Then she reached up, her fingers touching his weathered cheek, tracing a path to his lips. "I do want that," she said simply. Spring came to Wyoming as it always did, suddenly transforming brown to green in what seemed like days. The new barn rose against the blue sky, larger and stronger than the one Crawford's men had burned. The double pine herd grazed in fresh pastures, calves frolicking on unsteady legs. At Eliza's cabin, a garden flourished, vegetables in neat rows, wildflowers along the borders. The underground spring that had nearly cost them everything now fed irrigation channels, a small miracle of abundance in the harsh landscape. 2 places, 2 homes. And between them, worn by daily travel, a path through the pines, a connection made by choice, not necessity. On the porch of the ranch house, now stripped of Rebecca's fussy curtains and formal furniture, Matthew and Eliza sat watching the sunset. A book lay open between them. Homer again, but this time Matthew read aloud, his finger tracing the words, skills hard-won over winter evenings. When he got to the part about Penelope's faithfulness, Matthew said, closing the book, "I used to wonder how anyone could wait 20 years. Eliza smiled, the scar on her face catching the golden light. "And now? Now I understand that when you find something real, time doesn't matter so much." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over the simple gold band that had appeared there a month earlier, after a small ceremony with Samuel, Juan, and Franklin as witnesses. "Besides," he added with a smile, "I'd only waited 42 years to find you. Not quite Odysseus's record." As darkness settled over the Wyoming prairie, they remained on the porch, 2 scarred souls who had walked through fire and found each other on the other side. Inside the house, lamps glowed warmly, a beacon of home in the vast wilderness. Not all scars heal completely, but sometimes in the right light, they shine like silver.